Well, we'll have to just see what happens. Okay, I'm very happy to be here in Stockholm, okay. And I'm going to, as usual, start with just a little prayer that expresses two things. The first two lines of the prayer are for anybody in this room who already identifies with being a Buddhist. It's reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines are stating, we'd say, I suppose, in English we would say stating our purpose, you know. Well, they say in Tibetan, setting your motivation. So what we're stating basically is, here we are listening to these Buddha's views about the mind, about happiness, about suffering, about how life really, Buddha's expertise is this, I would say. Why are we listening? So that we can find some tools to do what? Well, essentially, long term, to develop what for the Buddha is actually our astonishing potential. This is what we're going to talk about. For our sake, and so also for the sake of others, because we all live in this crazy world together. So essentially that's what the prayer is saying. Excuse me, I'm not happy yet. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, we'll be right. Okay. I'll just sing it in Tibetan. Sangye charang choke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shog sangye charang choke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shog Sangye charang soke chognam la Jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi Dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki Drola penchir sangye dropa shok. So, you know, as I just said it briefly, but I think it's really, really true, and it mightn't be how we would tend to think about Buddhism, but Buddha's expertise, you know, what Buddha really is essentially talking about, what Buddhism is about, finally, is the human mind, is the way the mind works. So I think that's something kind of, I don't know, when we read Tibetan religion, certainly in Indian terms, in the framework of Tibet, in the 14th century Tibet, it's, we hear it with a very kind of religious mind. We don't hear it as practical. We don't hear it as psychology. We definitely do not. But the fact is, Buddha's not a creator, so technically he's not our view of religion. There's no concept of creator. But also, what he talks about is the mind. And that's surprising to us, I think. I mean, I mentioned this a few times lately. A couple of years ago, I heard the Dalai Lama just casually mention that it was these amazing Indians, more than 3,000 years ago, who were the ones who began this investigation into the nature of self. Now, we modern European, Christian, Jewish people, what do we know about India? We know lots about Greece. Now, I don't know about your Swedish language, but half of English is in Greek. All the fancy words are in Greek, because we adore our Greek history. We connect with that. What do we know about India? Absolutely nothing. It's completely mysterious to us, and therefore mystical as well. But that's where Buddha came from. He'd chosen to be born into this extraordinary environment where these great thinkers and yogis in this extraordinary culture of ethics. Actually, I remember hearing on the BBC World Service on the radio a couple of years ago an interview with some archaeologist. And he said that they were digging deep into the whole Hindu civilization. And one of the most unique things about it was they found no signs of any weapons of destruction. No signs of weapons, period. And I think for our human planet, that's an unusual thing. So that says something pretty enormous, I think, about the people at that time. And that's the culture into which Buddha was born. So at that time, there was this extraordinary, culture of all these different Indian views, and yes, about reality. I mean, their viewpoints about the universe. Of course, they're so abstract for us, completely arcane. Like I said, what do we know about Indian philosophy, Indian psychology, Indian spiritual paths, But actually what's extraordinary is, as the Dalai Lama said, they were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Now we do that, modern science, modern psychology is doing that, Mr. Jung, Mr. Freud. But where do they look for it? This is the crucial, extraordinary difference, is we in our modern world use our microscope and indeed our intelligence, but we investigate the brain, and we're very brilliant at that. I mean, there's extraordinary things happening these days in neuroscience and in psychology, but it's related to the familiarity with the brain. So the Buddha's expertise, coming from these amazing Indians before him, because they were the ones who invented this technique that the world now vaguely knows as mindfulness meditation, they created this extraordinary skill, absolutely remarkable psychological skill that enables a person to plumb the depths of their own consciousness internally. Not the brain. We're talking subjective, experiential, internal. So we have no equivalent in our modern society, in our modern science, in our modern psychology. In fact, we don't trust subjective internal. But this is so it's invisible to us actually. So they're the ones who created that technique. And this is an astonishing technique. And what they did was, and that's simply what's called single-pointed concentration. This extraordinarily sophisticated, disciplined, rigorous skill that enables a person to go beyond the grosser level of conceptuality and sensory consciousness. Now that's the only level of consciousness that we posit in our modern world. If you see it with a microscope, it exists. Well, this level of mind, and here they are also talking, the same as the Buddha, this level of our consciousness, this level of our being is not physical in its nature. The kids were behaved nicely. The boss was kind. The traffic was good. The lights were green. The food was delicious. I mean, do you get my point? Something really uncomplicated. That means you had a great day. So what you just did was describe the external world. Now, let's say the following day, the opposite happened. Hubby didn't give her a cup of tea. The kids were a nightmare. The weather was terrible. The boss was mean. The lights were red. The same, you know, some different physical things happened. And now how'd you go day to go? Oh, disaster. So this is completely normal in one sense, completely normal. And Buddha doesn't even argue that green, you know, yes, it's good to get a green light and it's a drag to get the red light, especially if you're late. He agrees. That's conditions that's called life. But what he's pointing out, and it's such a huge point, even though it seems a small point, that just because the lights are red, just because your husband doesn't give you a cup of tea when you want it, just because the kids are mean, that's no logical reason not to be happy, Robina. Now that's too shocking for us. Just because your husband cheats on you, Robina, is no reason to be unhappy. I mean, it sounds like nonsense. It sounds, in fact, quite shocking to say it so bluntly. But in a sense, it's good to say it like that, to get the meaning. Now, the fact is, we know this is true. We know we can think of some occasions in our life when things have really gone bad. But we've managed to interpret it differently. That's all, actually, that's the essence of it. That's all Buddha's saying. That what goes on in here are a series of interpretations of the external world. But they're so deeply ingrained, they're so habitual, we don't notice that they are interpretations. We call them feelings. We call them anger. We call them attachment. We call them jealousy. Whatever. Let's say I've got a boyfriend who cheats all the time. So speaking simplistically, I'll go to my therapist. So naturally, because our model in the world is your brain, your DNA, the chemicals, mummy, daddy, the Catholic nuns, your past boyfriends, we have to look into the world looking for a needle in a haystack. Somehow for the causes of why Robina keeps, choosing crummy boyfriends. Again, I repeat, there's nothing wrong with looking into the external conditions. But the Buddha's essential point, he's saying, if you cut to the chase and you look at the main thing, you will progress really quickly in life. Progress in terms of what? Happiness, pretty simply. Stability, clarity. That's the essence of how he's approaching life. That's all. And he's got, Buddha's extensive study of Buddhist psychology proves logically how this is so, but instinctively, initially, it is not what we think. We know every day we actually prove it. Someone's mean to you, but you shut your mouth and you decide to forgive them. That immediately proves that you changed the way you saw the situation. One day, you're feeling particularly relaxed and the red light comes, you say, okay, it's cool, Robina, it's only a red light, relax, babe. Right there, it's the proof that the red light is not the main cause of your suffering. I mean, we kind of know it in small, tiny things all the time, but we don't join the dots. We don't get the point. We don't get the learning from it, And of course, to really practice it strongly when really heavy-duty things happen is extremely, extremely difficult. And that's why the Buddhist view of being able to get some concentration and go more deeply into our mind to really do some, and not in a mystical sense, but in a very clear, disciplined sense, really do some unpacking and unravelling of all these cognitive stories in our mind. This is the real job of being a Buddhist, if you like. As one of my teachers, as Lama Yeshe says, being your own therapist, being your own psychologist. It's not just some cliche. It's kind of got a real truth to it, using the Buddhist approach. Now, the fact is, even this Buddha does not own. We know this already, and this is the key point about the Buddha. He's not a creator. He is not the inventor of these ideas. He didn't make up these things. He is not the creator of these things. And this is a massive point, because that's our instinctive assumption about religion, It's something you believe in. Not for the Buddha. Technically, it can't be. If he's not a creator, you've got to think that through. If he's not a creator, then where does all his information come from? I mean, if he didn't create these ideas, if it's not revelation, he's either made it up, stole it from someone else, or he's experienced the truth of it himself, like Einstein, And so basically he's saying, this is my findings about the mind, this is my findings about reality, this is my findings about what we can achieve as human beings, over to you, Use it, work with it, check it out, up to you. You're the boss, you know. That's very much the Buddhist approach. But the heart of it, the heart of the Buddhist approach, the day-to-day application of it, is this job of changing your mind. Yep, chuck the husband out if he's not behaving nicely. Nothing wrong with that. You know, if you order hot coffee and it comes as cold, it's cool to ask it to turn it into hot. But always the real practice comes is when you can't change it. That's usually when we go crazy. And that's our problem. Because it doesn't arise in our mind that I should change my mind. And this is the part that's quite heavy, because you will say, but I'm allowed to be angry, but I'm allowed to be jealous. My husband's cheating on me. And we see that as an absolute certainty. So then once you've got that view, forget it. You'll never be happy. It's impossible. But it's quite scary to think, you mean I could stop being jealous? Wow, that's an interesting concept. Never thought of that before. And then we're going to see it in a practical way, not in a moralistic way. Because as soon as we hear that, then it's kind of blaming me, you know. That's why we say, I'm allowed to be jealous. I'm not doing anything wrong. He's the one who's wrong. What do you mean I should change? He should change. This is very deep inside us. But the essence of the point for the Buddha is it's practical. He says, you want to be happy, Robina? Well, honey, it's in your hands. I mean, it seems annoying almost, you know, so simple in a sense. And why is it, and the words are simple, so why is it difficult? Well, he says because we're completely programmed, addicted to the other view. The ego view, the view of ego, the view, Lama Yeshe would sometimes call ego the self-pity me, you know. It sounds very cruel. But this is the essence of it. So for me, when I worked with people in prison, it was a very powerful learning about exactly this. For many years, I ran this non-profit dealing with, in America and Australia, mostly, dealing with people in prison. They start to write letters. And it was just very, especially in America, where it's kind of really intense. The prison system there is pretty terrible. They say that the United States has 5% of the world population, but it's got 25% of the prison population, meaning a quarter of all humans on this planet who live in prisons, live in American prisons. I mean, it's kind of shocking, you know. That's just one point. And then the sentencing, I mean, no point in going into details. I remember when the sentencing is just beyond bearing. In general, the suffering is extraordinary, you know. So this project started like in '97 when a Mexican-American fellow read a book of Lama Yeshe and got our address. I was editing Mandala, the magazine of our Buddhist organization, and he got our address and he wrote to me, and it started from there. And basically, for me, what was so moving about this experience, we were dealing with, over the years, I think 25,000 prisoners must have written letters to us. We'd send books. This is the program we had, sending books and giving them mentors, friends to write to, you know. So what for me was so starkly clear was the application of what I'm talking about here. When you're in prison, when you're in these nightmarish, you know, garbage dumps with a 30-year sentence, death row, there really isn't much you can do to change your external event. Really, there is nothing you can do to change your external world, which of course is why most people are miserable. I mean, it's just natural. Most people are miserable in prison. Most people go crazy, kill themselves or kill each other, you know. It is a really intense way to live life, some of the scenarios, some of the places I've been. So what was always for me then, giving these tools to these people who were interested in Buddhism, they'd write letters, we'd send books and visit and so on and so forth. Especially the more dire examples, like, you know, there's one story. I always tell this story. There's a woman I didn't meet, actually. I read about her, and I've heard radio interviews. She's out of prison now. But this is like 30 plus years ago in Florida. And this is such a stark example. Extreme examples often are good, you know. She was a hippie, she said. Basically a hippie with a hippie husband and hippie kids, hitching in Florida. They got picked up by two guys. The police stopped the car. The two guys killed the cops and blamed the hippies. So basically they're on death row. The husband is eventually executed. I mean, you know, you're trying to just, in ordinary life, think of bad times when someone's accused you of doing something you didn't do. That, I think, is enough for many of us to go crazy. We can't let go of it. At work, you know, it is so painful. It is so unbearable. We do not know why this is happening. I do not deserve this. And on a relative level, it's true. But this woman And this man, accused of, they're like considered to be animals. They kill police, they're like the worst of worst people. She was in the prison for 17 years, eventually got out, like a miracle. He was executed, lost their kids, blah, blah, blah. So the point of this woman, she wrote her memoir. And I mean, it's just something so simple and so cute, and we love to hear things like this. But for me, this is the exact point. It's such a perfect example. She said, at some point, I realized I couldn't change anything, But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. Now that sounds almost like, we love to read these things. We love to hear these things. It is so inspiring. But just try and hear it. Actually imagine the scenario. It's like hell. It's like unimaginable. And the normal world approach, the normal natural rising up in us of the fury of how dare that happen, She's allowed to be crazy. She's allowed to be angry. And one of the common things in the States is, so everywhere maybe, but they're so common, is wrongly accused people. People on death row 17 years, people in prison 27 years, get out eventually completely innocent, blah, blah. So many stories like this, So many groups of people are permanently working on trying to get people out of prison, who've been in there unfairly. Now, this woman, anyway, whatever. But that, for me, something, we like to hear it. We like to hear these things. But this is completely outrageous. So what I'm getting at is this, that this woman, she wasn't a Buddhist, I don't think. I think she did yoga and things. But the way I would say it is, she must have had such unbelievable intelligence. Because when you're overwhelmed by anger and resentment, it's like you lose your brain. You've got no intelligence whatsoever. You can't see anything rationally. You're so overwhelmed by the pain of this environment, this suffering. And this is how we go literally mad on this planet. At the same time, I read about one guy in the same situation, also innocent, who did in fact behave in the way that we think is normal. He went crazy. And apparently he would, as long as he had a voice, he'd be screaming, I did not rape and kill that woman. So somehow we understand this. Think of our ordinary life. Things going wrong out there. The husband doing something wrong, the work, the boss, the auntie, the uncle, the sister, next door neighbor. Our world is full of human beings, let's face it. And it's not the buildings that cause problems. It's not the cars that cause them. It's the people. It's human beings. So we're so addicted, naturally, to, as we would simply put it, blaming the outside. And it's not meant to be moralistic. Don't hear it this way. For the Buddha, it's a really practical issue. And this woman is such a brilliant example. One way of talking, in all of Buddhism almost, you could say he's dealing with this simple, fundamental, provable reality. Everybody wants happiness, and nobody wants suffering. It's almost, you could say, that's a basis for Buddhist psychology and philosophy to be rooted in. Because all he's saying is, hey guys, I've got some methods for you to get happy. I've got some methods for you to stop suffering. And the methods are, change your mind. The methods are, reinterpret your life. Reinterpret what's in front of you. That's really what it comes down to, all the way from here to Sangye, Buddha, It's the job of unpacking and unravelling what goes on in the mind and giving it far more power than we give it now. I mean, one time one of our teachers, Lama Zopa, he said, the vast majority of humans on this planet, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in our mind plays any role at all. And this sounds pretty shocking. But if we look at it, I mean, I think our views about what goes on in the mind are very, very extraordinary in the world, modern world. But it's emphasised. It's the brain aspect of it, which is marvelous. But we don't often deal directly with the experience itself. We're always looking for something that happened out there that's the cause of the experience. We immediately look out there straight away. We look out there. What's the cause of it? What mummy did, what daddy did, what he did, what they did, what the weather did, what the food did. That's very deeply ingrained in us, and it's reinforced in our science. I'm not trying to be fundamentalist here. So it takes enormous effort to hear the words that he's saying, the Buddha's saying, real simple. Yep, the world's a crummy place. Yes, people do terrible things to you. Yes, he agrees. Okay, he's got his reasons why. That's another discussion. The whole business of karma, that's another whole discussion. But all he's saying is, you know what? You can change the way you interpret the husband, the event. If you can change it as well, wow, fantastic. If you can get there and change the whole world and make it a better place, don't hesitate. Never stop. That's called compassion. But meanwhile, he says, reconfigure your own conceptual stories. Reconfigure the way you see the world. And that means you've got to pay attention to it. And if most of us in the world don't even know that what goes on in here plays any role at all, then we don't even know what it means to pay attention to it. What do you mean, look at my mind? It sounds a bizarre idea to us. We really don't think it. We really are so addicted to believing that what I think here is merely the response to this out there. So all our attention goes to the outside. I mean, an extreme example of how ridiculous this view is and how we really believe it's true, that what goes on in here doesn't count, that it's my secret world. No one needs to know about it, and it's not that important. I mean, this is a ridiculous story, but I remember reading in my iPad when I looked up I read my newspapers and things, and one morning in the New York Times, I saw on the iPad one woman in Brooklyn had got into her husband's computer and discovered that he was part of a cannibal site, and they were planning to kill and eat her. That's hilarious. It's not funny, but it's hilarious. Well, she didn't just call the police, she called the FBI. I don't know why. It just sounded more serious, I suppose, for her, for God's sake. But the point is this, his lawyer, the defense was, oh, but they're allowed to think this. They're allowed to have these fantasies. They're allowed to. It doesn't mean they're going to do it, which implies that what goes on in your mind doesn't play any role in your life. I mean, that's the most insane concept you can even imagine. But that's what intelligent people think that. This intelligent lawyer. So we have these I would suggest, very weird views about this mind of ours. You know? And Buddha's expertise is to unpack and unravel it to a degree of subtlety and clarity that truly does not exist in our culture, you know. So it's kind of interesting, that aspect. So the application of it, the practical application of this approach is that I'm in charge of my life. The experiential consequence of this approach, taking it on board, is that I become less of a victim, less fearful, less angry, less resentful, less jealous, less needy, more brave, more courageous, more grown up, if you like. Therefore, more kind, more intelligent, more compassionate, more wise. And I'm not joking. These are the literal words. This is the Buddhist approach. And like I said, please, Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He just points it out. He's pretty good at it. That's all I would suggest. You know, this is his expertise. But to do this job, we've got to recognize that the jealousy is there, the fear is there, the depression is there. So it sounds easy, but why is it so difficult for us? Well, I think there are various things conspiring against us doing this job. First is the whole philosophy we have, which I've been stating already, that it's all out there. And if you keep looking back and like for a needle in a haystack, you'll find, aha, that's why I get jealous. Back in an event when I was 4.5 or something, and I'm being a bit sarcastic. But we're very caught up in that view, because we really do believe, this is our science, that is the main cause of why Robina is like this. Buddha disagrees fundamentally with that, you know. That's the biggest one, I'd say, the biggest thing conspiring against our even wanting to work with our own thoughts and feelings and emotions. The next one is, I think, is that because we're not brought up with techniques that enable us to be conscious of what on earth is going on inside us, since we're tiny, then we only notice what's going on inside us when it becomes very fierce feelings, either very happy feelings or very bad feelings. So, you know, for someone like me who's very volatile, and it wouldn't have taken me too long when my sister was mean to me to notice that I was angry, because the words would be vomiting out my mouth in like 1 second. But maybe one of my sisters, when things didn't go well, it took her ages to notice, until one day she couldn't get out of bed because she was inert with depression. Because it's more subtle. It took longer for her to notice that she was depressed, because we don't pay attention in here. So we either notice we're having a problem when the words vomit out the mouth, or when you can't get out of bed one morning. In other words, we only notice what's going on in our mind, in our cognitive process, in our thoughts and feelings and emotions, when they become physical. Now, this again is reinforced with respect in our modern psychological views. But the Buddha's view is, it says, he's saying, and this is just a hypothesis here, I'm not asking you to believe it, Buddha's own findings is that consciousness, mind, is not physical in its nature. And this is a vast component of Buddhist psychology. I remember reading an interesting book. One of my jobs is to edit books, and one that I did a couple of years ago was edit a book by one of our teachers, Lama Zopa, about how to help people at the time of death. It was very interesting. And at the same time I read this, and so of course in the Tibetan Buddhist, in the Vajrayana model of Buddhism, there are these very detailed, sophisticated explanations of the death process. And this is the same model that the Tibetan medical system uses. So it's a very fascinating view, you know, of the death process, when death starts, when life begins. It's very fascinating. So I remember reading at the same time as doing this book, I read a book by an American medical journalist. Can't think of his name, Dick or Nick Teresi or something. He's a very funny fellow. And it was about, it was called The Undead. Well, it's not about zombies. You know, it's actually, it's all about his own, I read it very briefly, his findings about all the contradictions and problems and things that are happening now in the industry of taking organs. You know, what's a polite word for it? You know, farming, whatever the word is. People giving their hearts and their livers, which is marvellous. But he was really quite cynical, it's incidental, about the whole industry, whatever, and the elitism of it and the whatever. But the key thing for him was the big problems now in the medical profession in the United States, in the different states, now their simple view of when death began have been completely shattered. People are very confused now. Why? Well, one of the reasons is because one of the common things for centuries that all cultures have reported is about people, quote unquote, coming back to life. So we can't deal with that with the, you know, religion, they call it the soul, and so, okay, they might have an explanation. But the materialist view doesn't know how to explain that, so we just put it on the back burner, you know. But there's so many, and right now, this is what's happening. They just get a person ready to cut their liver out, and the person goes back to life, you know. No one knows why. They look like they were dead. So there's so many contradictions coming up. And it's very interesting, he had a whole chapter. He said he's an atheist himself, he has no views about these things. He's a very good journalist. He had a whole chapter on people who report what they call out-of-body experiences. You know, Buddhism would have detailed explanations of all this. They'd call it your subtle consciousness. There's no time to go into it all here. But people who report that they know exactly, they're watching what's going on while they're being operated on. Well, of course, most medicos, most of the medical profession are completely cynical about that. Don't be ridiculous. But he quoted one particular woman who had to have such a radical procedure. They practically had to sort of drain her of blood, drain her body of everything. And from their point of view, there's no way there could be any consciousness whatsoever. But she reported, and he was very funny about it, the most vivid out-of-body experience. So, of course, these doctors have to listen to this. They can't explain it, you know. So, anyway, this one doctor, all he said was, I can say now with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I have no idea what it is, but that much I can say. So in a sense, it's good that people are questioning, and this is exactly the topic that the Dalai Lama and many, you know, and all these conferences they're having with the scientists, you know, looking at exactly this point, which I think is fantastic. The people are opening their minds to alternative possibilities, you know. It's marvelous. So anyway, this is Buddha's point, that your consciousness is not a function of the brain. Okay, that mightn't sound very reasonable if we've got understanding about the brain, but no time to go into details. But that's essentially the crucial point. Now, that's such a long story, I forget why I said it. I was coming to a point and I've lost the plot. Okay, the obstacles to why this is such a difficult job for us to do. To simply say, oh, Robina, stop being jealous, it's okay, darling, you know, and relax. Why is that so? It sounds like hilarious to us, you know. One, because we believe that all the causes are out there. Two, we don't notice our feeling. We don't notice what happens in our mind. And this is the Buddhist view about the mind. Stuff's going so deep at such... You know, Buddha's view of unconscious would leave Jung's view for dead, I promise you. I mean, the way they talk about if you saw a person who had accomplished this single-pointed concentration, which people have been achieving and accomplishing up till right now for thousands of years, which means they're accessing these subtler levels of their own cognitive process, their own mind. If you were to see a person in that state, they would look like they were dead, because they've gone beyond the grosser conceptual and sensory level, which of course is all we posit in our modern world. So we've got to open our mind to these things, and it's all there in the literature. It's dealt with in vast depth in the literature, you know. So therefore, what Buddha's point is this, what I'm getting to, the deepest reason it's so difficult for us to do this job of changing our mind, quote unquote, is because we think of this stuff as feelings. When you say jealous, when you say angry, when you say depressed, when you say anxious, it's like we almost can't describe it, can we? And it's mostly this intense, virtually physical feeling. It's so painful, but physical. That's why people who are depressed don't know they're depressed for years, because you haven't noticed. So we only notice what's going on in our mind, and in Buddhist view, deep down in our mind. And don't hear that as cosmic. It's not. We're capable of plumbing it, Buddha says. We're capable of going down there. That what goes on in there, we don't notice it until it gets to the surface, when it's so deeply entrenched and so deeply and physical. And then it's almost like it's too late, you know. It's a bit like, you know, you're driving on the freeway at 120 kilometers an hour, and you suddenly discover your wheels are falling off. Now, we know that will be ridiculous, because we know we have amazing maintenance, and this is a silly example, but please hear it. We've got incredible maintenance for our machines, our houses, our bodies. We've got amazing preventive things, maintenance. You know, you might have a crash on the road, but it's rare that all your wheels fall off, because we know how to take care of the car. But I'm serious here, we do not have any maintenance for our actual thoughts and feelings and emotions, because we call it physical as well. So this is Buddha's expertise, I would say, learning to pay attention at a deeper level before all the thoughts, all the conceptual stories deep down that are all rumbling along. We all know that from the moment you wake up in the morning until the second you get to sleep, your head is full, is it not, of these uncontrolled, unedited ravings. And we think that's just normal. Well, Buddha's techniques, you know, single-pointed concentration, one of the consequences of single-pointed concentration, this is like science fiction for us, is that you have absolute, effortless control over every tiny thought. There's no way your deluded thoughts will get out of control. You've got complete, astonishing control. You'd be such a sophisticated person emotionally, you wouldn't believe it. We have nothing like that in our culture. That's from India, thousands of years ago. The Buddhists are doing this, people are doing this every day, because we're able to go beneath to to hear the elaborate conceptual stories that inform the feelings of anger, the feelings of jealousy, the feelings of depression. So it's a bit like we only notice we're angry when the wheel's falling off, when you're having a raging fight with your husband. Oh, what'll I do? I'm angry. That's like saying when your wheels are falling off at 100 k's an hour, what'll I do? Well, it's a bit late to notice. But we don't know how else to notice, because we don't have techniques to pay attention. And that's this skill that Buddha's giving us, you know. So, of course, once you do pay attention, then the question is, then what, you know? Well, that's where we have to, I mean, the Buddha's view of the mind is very clear, and this is not the way we tend to think in the West, in the modern world, and many people who do mindfulness don't think like this either, because they don't study Buddha's model. But Buddha's model is fundamentally clear, and it's implied by the end result, sangye, rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness. So if that's the end result, it implies that the job is to learn to distinguish between all the crazy commotion, you know, all the conceptual stories called anger, and distinguish them from all the conceptual stories called compassion, or all the conceptual stories called attachment that pollute the conceptual story called love. This is not how we tend to think. But when we start to understand this, it's a revelation, you know, meaning we start to pay attention, then we hear all the crazy stories, and we are able to identify them, and then gradually reconfigure them. It's the hardest job we'll ever do, but this is the real key. And this is why, again, I would suggest, many of the misconceptions You know, there are many misconceptions, it seems to me, just talking to people, about mindfulness. One is that it's an alternative to a pill, which means you only do it when your wheels are falling off, which is ridiculous. Like if you're blissfully happy and in love with your new boyfriend, or, you know, and then someone said, why don't you meditate? You say, what are you talking about? Why should I? I'm happy. So we assume it's you do when you're about to kill yourself. It's assumed something you do only then. That's bizarre. For a start, it's not like that. Therefore, because we're so desperate by then, we can't stand the pain of the anger or the jealousy, then we are frantic to make it all go away. So the second misconception is you do mindfulness meditation to make it all go away. Well, that's like you've got cancer and you've got a head and you've got pain. So you take a pill which makes the pain go away and you think you've solved the problem of the cancer. No. You've got to get to the root of it. Or we might think it's all about mindfulness, about having a nice feeling or something, you know. Not like that. So it's a bonus if you do your 5-minute, 10-minute meditation and you also calm your mind down. That's a bonus. But if you sit there for 10 minutes doing your mindfulness, trying to focus, trying to concentrate, but it's like chaos for 10 minutes, don't think that's a bad meditation. That's a good meditation. Because why? Because you're noticing all the thoughts, the things we desperately want to go away. But we don't, it's the opposite. We have to learn to hear them. It's like, you know, we've got to identify, we've got to distinguish between the chaotic thoughts, the unhappy ones, the ridiculous ones, the ones that are causing the pain, and the virtuous ones, the reasonable ones, the positive ones. They're like a big soup at the moment of an emotion. We have all these feelings, but they're mixed together. We can't distinguish the neuroses from the virtues. And this makes us a bit nervous because in psychology we don't like sounding like moralistic, you know. So saying bad thoughts and good thoughts sounds a bit rude. But the Buddha's not being moralistic. He's saying there are some conceptual stories, some emotions that are painful, that are breaking your heart, Robina. It's not out of moralistic or vindictiveness that you should say, I shouldn't be angry, I shouldn't be jealous. He's saying, honey, look how it causes you to suffer. It's out of kindness to yourself that you'd want to identify it, you know. And not just the feeling, but to go beneath it, to hear the conceptual story that informs the feeling. That's the part that's difficult, but that's the crucial job. So there's some information. I think you should have to ask me some questions now. It's practically time for dinner, I understand. So any questions about all that? Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, yeah. Pleasure.
I find to keep myself on the path, a wise person said to me a while ago, if you think you're on the path, try to go 20 minutes without an opinion.
I see. Okay,
and
good. So
that have opinions.
Okay.
I find.
Okay. Okay. So that's a really good point. So you're suggesting we shouldn't have any opinions. So what do you? So what? How would you distinguish between? So would you agree that if I see a little girl running across the road and she's about to fall into a car, that I say, "Oh my God, the little girl's going to get hit by the car." That's an opinion, but it also happens to be an opinion that's in sync with the truth. And then second, it wouldn't be such a cool thing. So that's an opinion. I wouldn't want to tuck that out. So it seems to me the opinions you're suggesting are not useful, are the neurotic, deluded, critical, negative ones, because they make a mess of you and they cause you to harm others. Would you agree with that point?
Well, no.
You wouldn't agree?
No.
Okay, good. So what are you telling me then?
Because action would come before any opinion came.
Oh, excuse me, I don't agree. How would your body know what to do if your thought didn't realise there's a little girl going to hit by a car?
Because after 30 years of drug addiction,
yeah.
I used much time doing nothing that I ever thought about.
Okay, wait a minute. No, okay. I think this is, okay, anyway, okay. But there's a Buddhist perspective, there's a lot of assumptions in what you're saying that he wouldn't agree with. That you're suggesting so you're suggesting that you'd rush to help the little girl, but what would be, but you already interpreted there's a little girl being run over by a car. That's nothing to do with your body, that's your mind. There's a thought in your mind that allows you to see a shape of a girl and a car, and you go, oh my God. And then the thought and the action come so quickly, it's as if you do the action. But if you didn't have that thought, honey, if you didn't know how to interpret that activity, you would not rush out to help. I think if you think of that, I think you would agree with me.
Well,
and that's the level of opinions that Buddha's talking about.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, go.
I saw a young boy once with a supermarket wagon. I was going to go full to him and say, you shouldn't be playing with that. 2 hours later, the boy died, stuck in a lift.
So what's your point then?
Well, the point is, I really should have done something.
Oh, okay. So then, no, okay, I think it's okay. I hear your point, but the way I would say it using Buddha's terms is not the way you're saying it. Without thinking, you're saying. Without thinking is something which, is, if you play the piano, you do it without thinking, don't you? If you're good at the piano, you familiarise yourself with the theories of music, you can do it spontaneously. But that's because you've familiarised yourself for years with lots of really clear thinking called musical theory. So the Buddha's view is that what we do now out of anger or love, either way, is coming from an elaborate series of thoughts. And he's suggesting we should have more virtuous opinions because that informs our compassion and kindness, and get rid of the rubbish opinions because they cause us to have problems. That's his way of saying it.
Sounds good.
You understand my point?
Yes.
So do you have a question or you just had a statement? That was what you said? What did you say? Thank you, darling. That's good, thank you. That's very nice. Someone else? Someone else? Nothing else? Yes. Lisa.
If a person very near to you, in my case my brother,
yes,
have suffered for years and years,
yes,
with depression and
yes,
bad feelings,
yes,
and you don't know what to do about it.
That's it, darling. Yes. This is this is a really that's it. That's the point.
No, but I mean, if I think,
yeah,
and I feel compassion and love towards
yeah,
him,
that's right.
I want to save his life.
That's right.
I can't.
No, that's right. I know.
And sometimes I realize I can't.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Sometimes I forget I realize.
No, no, there you go. It's a good point, isn't it? So okay.
That feeling.
No, I hear you, darling. I understand. So the Buddhist analysis of that is very fascinating. So first of all, and I'm just using the Buddha's view here. You don't have to agree with it, but this is my job, okay? So the Buddha's view, the key. We spend the next week talking about this. We'll do it after our little dinner break. But the key neurosis that we've all got that runs the show, and this is not how we tend to think, is he calls it attachment, which is this primordially deep, neurotic. First of all, it's multifaceted. The deepest feeling of dissatisfaction. Therefore, it causes us to hanker after something. It's basically an emotional hunger in us that is essentially like a little junkie in us that only wants the nice things. Attachment is like a little girl in there. You're a girl, I'm a girl, that wants only things to be nice. Put it that way. And then you understand it in relation to your brother. So there's a neurotic part of Lisa, and we've all got it, that only wants things to be nice. And that causes us to manipulate to make things happen. And if that's strong enough, you'd be a really self-centered, neurotic, mean person. And look at the world. People go around doing what they want, how they want, when they want, harming other people, because this attachment is so strong. Do you understand? Now, most of us also have love and compassion, and that tempers our attachment. So you've got love and compassion for your brother. You can see his suffering, but you're recognizing the truth, that there's only so much you actually can do for him. You can guide him, you can love him, you can give him advice, but in the end, you can bring a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Now, that's when attachment is the part of you that's needy, that wants him to be better, that'll cause you to manipulate him, to force him to do this, and then get upset when it doesn't happen. Because anger or anxiety or depression are the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And these are very deep and very subtle inside us.
Actually, I think I passed that state when I
well, the Buddha says you're enlightened if that's the case. No, not his view. His view, this stuff's very deep.
I don't force him anymore. I don't try anymore.
Okay, so what's the point then? So what's the point then?
The point is, if I think like, oh, it's his karma, it feels like it's an easy way out.
I know, well, that's because we have a very fatalistic view of those words. But no. See, that's where I think we feel that means, well, then nothing I can do about it. What to do, just the way life is. And sometimes, okay, that's fatalistic and that's not caring sometimes. But the other extreme we have is, but there's always something I must be able to do to help him. And you bash your head against a brick wall 99% of the time. Then you're exhausted. Because you can see sometimes we literally can't change something. And this is... So it's not being fatalistic in thinking, well, I can't do more. But it doesn't mean you give up. You've got to be watching him like a hawk. You still love him for who he is. You'll still care, but you're watching, and you might find a tiny window of opportunity in 6.5 years' time when something in him has shifted, and that'll give you the chance to be helpful. It's like being really wise. Whereas attachment, or if you're a mother, let's say, jumping in all the time trying to save the kid. Do you understand? Yeah. Which is what attachment does. It's the same with our brother. And that's attachment's problem. Yeah. But saying call the word karma, whatever you like, but it's not being fatalistic, because sometimes it's true you can't do anything. It's just true. Doesn't mean you stop loving him. And it doesn't mean you stop trying. Well, okay, I like the Dalai Lama as an example. Listen, it's 60 years since they got chucked out of their country, okay? And I think he's obvious to the world. He hasn't stopped for 60 years trying to change it. He never gives up. But he's not angry, he's not resentful, he's not neurotic, he's not self-piteous. He cracks jokes about his enemies. So he's happy, he's given up, let's say he's given up attachment and anger and neurosis, but he never gives up trying. He tries diplomatically, socially, religiously, politically. He never gives up. But it's not like you give up, therefore it doesn't matter. That giving up doesn't mean not caring. You still keep caring, but you don't have all these expectations because you're trying to change it. It better change. That's the problem. So it's a very powerful combination, you know. So meaning, see his suffering, love him for who he is, do what you can, meanwhile it doesn't rip your heart out. That's the skill. And that, I think, if you look at the Dalai Lama, is fairly evident. He's a happy guy, you know. And yet, do you understand?
Yeah.
That's the skill. That's the skill to get these two together. Yeah. Time for tea, dinner.
I think that's a beautiful note to finish on.
Oh, good. Good, darling. So let's have a... So what are we going to...
We're going to have a dinner break.
My gosh, a lot of people to get dinner. Amazing. So please enjoy dinner. Have a chat about what we're talking about, whatever you like. And you immediately, like he says, without thinking. It's like it's without thinking because the habit is there and it just feels like an instinct, but it's out of the habit of thinking that kind of thing based on attachment, based on anger. So itself is a conceptual story. Anger is a conceptual story, but they're deep down and subtle. That's the thing. So go on, then.
So how do I work with that?
Well, that's the thing. If you've got, okay, you see, this is where it seems very abstract, and it's interesting his point about no thinking. If we look at what we mean by feelings, we think it's got nothing to do with thoughts. It sounds like a joke to say it's informed by thoughts. When we say thoughts, we think of something rational, don't we? So thoughts are rational, feelings are beyond, but that's the Buddha's interesting finding from his own experience, and he says we will find that too when we start to dig deep. That the feeling, which includes our body, of what we call anger, as I'm shouting and yelling at my boyfriend, that is just the tip of the iceberg from the habit of having all these deep, elaborate stories in my mind deep down, which I've habituated myself with, which is, how dare you do that to me? It is not my fault. I do not deserve that. It's really quite elaborate. And in Buddhist psychology, there's this kind of like a hierarchy of these different states of mind, the way they describe them. For example, okay, just briefly, the Buddhist view is there's the neurotic states of mind, there are the positive states of mind, love, compassion, and then there's a third category which I like to call the mechanics of our mind, like the ability to concentrate, to remember things. That's not good or bad. Everyone needs those. Do you understand what I'm saying? So Buddhist psychology deals in enormous depth with these different states of mind in a very fascinating way, you know? So the negative ones, Buddha would say that the nature of them is that they are distorted, exaggerating stories. They don't have a basis in reality. They're extreme. So if you think of, for example, when I'm angry with you, forget, the feeling is incredible, the hurt is unbearable, but you think, listen to what I'm saying. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. Wouldn't you say that's one of the main words to express anger? If you read on a piece of paper, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. You'd say, oh, that person's angry. If you see, about you sleeping with somebody else, I know you are. Oh, that person's jealous. If you hear a person say, you're a very kind person, thank you. It's not, words express feelings, So the Buddha's saying, whereas we think feelings are like everything, but they're just the tip of the iceberg, that are the expressions from habit, including our body, of these elaborate conceptual stories that we've practiced having, which is why they feel like they're instinctive. So that's why we've got to have concentration. We've got to step back and go deeper and deeper. And don't hear that as mystical. That's mystical in the West, but not from the Buddhist point of view. It's a very rigorous job we have to do. When you're listening, so as we get more and more practiced, what we're doing is we're not waiting till suddenly the words vomit out my mouth to notice I'm angry. I'm aware of what I'm thinking from the second I wake up, ever more subtly, ever more deep. You're conscious so that you hear all the stories. You know your habits, and so then you become cautious. And you protect yourself, and you're even able to change yourself before the words come out the mouth. So it all comes down to these elaborate but deeply instinctive conceptual stories. So now we know from the second we wake up in the morning until the time we go to sleep, the mind never stops. The thoughts are never stopping. But it's chaos, isn't it? There's no clarity there. There's sort of like unedited, berserk, crazy stories never ending. And we know that when that gets really serious, that's what's called mental illness. When people can't, there's no thermostat, you know. So when a person's got a lot of habit to get upset easily when people don't do what they like, that's called anger. But it seems almost too simple. We want to call it something more fancy. But uncontrolled thoughts. It all comes down to the mind, the thoughts. And then more and more you get concentration, and you're using this Buddhist model that enables you to distinguish between the weeds and the herbs in your garden. Then you get some kind of intelligence in literally arguing with them. I mean, we can all do that every day. If you're my best friend and you keep being late, and I love you very much, and I know you can't help it, so I'm getting angry before you get there. I'm going to tell her, blah, blah, blah. Oh, shut up, Robina, give her a break. That's talking to myself. So the conclusion is, I say, hello, darling, how are you? I just did some inner therapy. I just didn't follow my feelings. I use my virtuous thoughts to argue with my stupid thoughts. That's all Buddha's saying, but at a much deeper, more sophisticated level all the time, doing this at an ever subtler level and unpacking all these nonsense of the delusions. So under the heading of deluded or neurotic, there's really like a hierarchy of them. There are thousands of states of mind, but in Buddhist psychology you can narrow them down to really three main ones, which seems almost too simple, you know, because we're so complicated in Western psychology. And the root one, and this is, I mean, Buddhist literature deals with this in enormous depth. The root one is this primordially deep, wrong sense of self. That's where Buddha diverged from these amazing Hindus about his own findings about the very nature of self. And this is the stuff of the deep stuff in Buddhist psychology, you know. So that is the one that runs the show, and it's a neurotic, deluded sense of poor, miserable self-pity me that's separate and lonely and bereft. And then that gives rise to the next main one, which I began to talk here in Lisa's situation. We've all got this, but it's so primordial, we don't even think of it as a problem. And it's really this primordially deep, what they call attachment, but it's like an incredible emotional hunger that is really the sense of I'm not enough. I don't have enough. No matter what I do, it's not enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. No matter how much you're on time, it's never enough. No matter how much you tell me you love me, it's never enough. It's this bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. And it's primordially deep, you know. And then what it gives rise to is always this constant hunger for something that's missing out there. So the first level that it goes to is attachment to food, attachment to things. And then, of course, the biggest one is attachment to being loved and being seen by others and approved of. So this is it's this primordially deep, this attachment. And then it gives rise to the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Now, that's not just when the big things happen, like when your boyfriend leaves you, but when you get upset one day about something. You get annoyed when the red light comes instead of the green light. The little baby things all day. The attachment's like this motor. It's running us continuously, and it's like this emotional hunger, like I said here, that is desperate to get the nice things. That means what I want. So if you like cake, you want the cake to be there. If you like, the car to be a certain shape, you can't stand if the car's not that shape. And if we've got a lot of attachment, we get upset very easily when it doesn't get what it wants, and that's called anger. So attachment and anger seems such simple, boring words psychologically. These are primordial in all of us, and they're manifesting in our daily life. Now, our trouble is we wait till it's so bad and the wheels are falling off, and I better go to a therapist. But if we understood our mind every day and noticed these thousands of thoughts and began to really unpack and unravel them, and this is a very sophisticated job, then we can start to literally reconfigure our stories, and that means changing your mind. So eventually you'll actually argue with your anger every day, so one day you'll eventually find that you no longer get angry. Not because you've suppressed the emotion, because you've literally heard the stories in there and you've unpacked and unraveled them. It is quite a sophisticated job, but this is the real job of applying Buddhist techniques. So why you have mindfulness is so that you can see what's going on, not just to make it all go away and feel gooey and nice, because you've got to deal with the problem. Are we communicating? So really it's arguing with your thinking, and we do it every day. But sometimes when it's really bad, if I've got a lot of jealousy, and he's my boyfriend, I forget your name again. David, he's my boyfriend from past time. So if I've got a strong habit to be jealous, we know this. the habit is really strong. And the second he's late, you're already raging you're writing a novel already, isn't it? And part of my wisdom in me, I can hear myself doing it, but nothing will stop me because the habit's so strong. It's almost like you're crazy. Watch, Robina, you're going completely crazy here. Shut up, sensible. And crazy goes on again, you know. And then he comes to the door and you shout at him, you know. Do you understand? Because we're uncontrolled and we don't pay attention to all the thoughts. That's why it's not a question of making them all go away. That'll make us feel better temporarily. But we've got to learn to be familiar with them, which was not comfortable. I mean, one of my friends is a Buddhist and a therapist, and she says this job is like having your hands in your own shit. It is not comfortable. I mean, anybody even doing any kind of therapy, which is fantastic. You go to therapy because you really want to deal with yourself. It's already fantastic we want to do that. Well, Buddha goes much more dramatic. You really are not even dealing with your husband and your next door neighbour and David. It's good to learn about David, but what you've got to really do, Buddha says, is look at your own anger itself. So this is something very interesting too, because when we hear this even when you hear the word a story, so, you know, okay, keep it simple. Like, let's say I ask my therapist, why am I angry? So we start looking at the things that happened to me. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with looking at the conditions, because they're part of my life. What Daddy did, what Robina did, what he did, what Mummy did, what Daddy did, what David did, why I chose that boyfriend. So I can sort of see the evolution of why I get angry and why I get jealous. That's the way we tend to treat it, isn't it? There's an assumption I began getting jealous when these things happened. And we think that very deeply. So Buddha's view is deeper, I would suggest, more fundamental, put it that way. So just as our hypothesis here, he's suggesting we come born with this stuff, not from Mummy and Daddy and Grandma and Grandpa and the monkeys, but from our own stuff. So never mind that, but even still, he's saying that they're habits in my mind. So then the therapist's view is, well, Daddy did this and Fred did this and the Catholic nuns did that. That's why you're jealous. Then I'll say to Buddha, well, Buddha, why am I jealous? And his answer will be, well, Robina, darling, you must have been jealous yesterday. But Buddha, why was I jealous yesterday? And he will keep answering the same question in the same way. Basically, you're jealous. It's sort of like asking, why are you good at playing piano, Robina? Well, duh, I did play it yesterday. And why? Because I played it the day before. In other words, I've practiced piano. It's hardly surprising. You don't say, if you say to me, Robina, why are you good at piano? Well, it's Bach's fault. It's Mr. Steinway's fault. No, we're honoured to take responsibility. It's my habit. I practiced it. But not when you're angry. No way. That's everybody else's fault. So all Buddha's saying, honey, it's a habit. So that's pretty powerful. But we're so addicted to find something that happened that gets me off the hook, that gives me the permission to be angry. So it's that's part of the way ego works. Buddha's way more direct. Honey, the anger's yours. And it's not blame, but it's kind of powerful. The jealousy is yours. Yes, David's a creep. That's his problem. Now what's mine? And that's the point. And that's tough, because we want to find the thing out there. Do you understand? That's very instinctive. So to be able to just humbly observe, I've got the habit to be jealous, the habit to be kind, the habit to be good at music, the habit to be loving, the habit to be forgiving, the habit to lie. That's the key thing Buddha's saying. So to learn to go directly into those and own them, and then know that they're not set in stone. Do you see? That's the essence of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it's tough because we want to find a reason that gets us off the hook. That's ego's function. It's kind of ironic, you know. It's not my fault. That's why that woman in prison is unbelievably profound. I mean, unbelievable. Most people I know in prison, terrible sentences. Some of them are guilty, yeah, but some terrible sentences, unfair. I mean, really shocking. And the commonest one is depression, hopelessness. But to really be able to be accountable, that woman who was utterly innocent, husband executed, she had this incredible intelligence, I would say, to recognize, as she just said, they couldn't take my mind from me. And in other words, she recognized that by working on her own mind, literally reconfiguring her interpretation of her environment, it sounds kind of cosmic almost, but and so the conclusion is she became happy. And she got out, that's the bonus. And the nice bonus was, I remember reading, she went to Ireland to be at some Amnesty International conference, and she met and fell in love with an IRA guy who'd also been accused of killing 2 police, and who was innocent. And now they're living in the country in Ireland. They're like old and pink-faced and sweet, fat little kind of tubby, fat, sweet people. Dearest people in the whole world, running retreats for people who've come out of prison who've been wrongly accused. The sweetest, dearest human beings. I was so just moved by them, you know. So suffering's intense. I mean, they're extreme examples, but for me, and they're not Buddhists. They do yoga. I think the guys are the same, you know, whatever it is. But there's this common sense. But it's hard to do. We know it. Even when you're accused of something you did do, like break the cup, you were trying to find a reason to get off, you know. But it's very hard to own responsibility. We either blame someone else or we blame ourselves and get all guilty and neurotic. And that's ridiculous too. But this honesty, okay, Robina, it's my anger. What can I do about it? And the other problem is, I think, I'll just suggest, because we're so convinced it's our brain or it's the chemicals, that it's too painful to own it because you think you're set in stone. Whereas if you know it's just a cognitive story, but it's a habit, then you know you can change it. It's not set in stone. That's the key point Buddha makes. That's what he makes about all his teachings about impermanence, you know. It means your mind's not set in stone. You can change it, honey. Which means change the interpretation of things. It's the hardest job we'll ever do. Doesn't mean we shouldn't change the outside. Leave David. Yes, if he's not going to change. But our trouble is we go back like a moth to a flame. Why should I leave? He's the problem. And then one day you kill him. You know, I mean, what are you proving? You understand? So it's really a practical issue, but it's like a minefield to navigate because there's so much emotional drama in there and hurt and not fair and poor me and it's not my fault. That's the function of ego, this kind of self-pity. I'm not trying to be mean, you know. It's very deep inside us and very instinctive, very deeply instinctive. That's why this technique of the Buddha's, invented by these amazing people before him, it's literally called concentration. But it's a remarkable, clear level of concentration that's stunning, actually, that we don't have an equivalent of in our culture, that enables you to see crystal clear, more deeply, what the hell is going on inside here, you know. So it's a really practical issue, and it's not some mystical thing. I mean, when you read all the spiritual literature, it always sounds mystical, you know, meditators and yogis and visions and blah. I can't stand all that talk. It's incredibly practical, you know. That's the important point about it. Are we communicating? Any questions? Yep. He's thinking about it.
It's apropos addiction.
What, darling?
Apropos de l'addiction.
Yeah, right.
I take my time because I'm not so fluent in English.
Okay, please forgive me. I'm only fluent in Australian.
I feel sometimes addicted or stuck in Dharma books. Let me. Yeah, I know. Okay,
go on.
I understand.
So come to the point.
Yes, and really sometimes I can feel like je m'étouffe. How do you say?
Strangle.
Not strangled, but.
Choking?
Yes, I'm not giving air to myself.
Okay, what's the problem? So come, ask a question.
Could you help me to formulate the question? I mean, you are the doctor.
Yeah, but you haven't told me any symptoms yet. I mean, you're telling me that you're overwhelmed by too many Dharma books. Is that your problem?
Yes, but...
what you're talking about is it's all too intellectual, not experiential.
Completely practicing every day is not the question.
So what's the problem?
The question is that I don't have time to do other things. And I feel completely...
Wait a minute, excuse me. You mean you're telling me you're so busy practicing Dharma all day? What do you mean by Dharma? Because Dharma is your life.
It's a practice of sitting, meditation.
Well, then you're wasting your time. Get out there and... What's your job? What do you do with your life? You've got a husband, a wife, a baby, a life, a job. What have you got? What's your life?
It depends.
What do you mean? It depends.
Every day is completely different.
Well, you don't need to work to earn money.
Yes, I work, of course.
Well, then how do you apply this stuff in your life?
In the bookshop.
Well, how do you apply this stuff in your daily life? That's the point.
How do I?
Apply the things you're reading in your books in your daily life.
The most important thing is to have at least 2-3 hours on the morning for sitting. Then I have to go to my work.
Okay, I'm really confused. So what's your question?
And my question is that
Yeah.
sometimes I feel completely isolated.
So what are you doing on your cushion? Okay, what are you doing on your cushion for 3 hours?
I practice.
Doing what?
Yes.
Doing what? No, I'm serious. Doing what?
Yeah, Zazen.
Well, then I think you're completely wasting your life.
Why?
You're pissing your life down the toilet.
Why? Tell me why.
What are you doing with all this? You're just proving it yourself. You said you're doing this busy, watching, sitting on your cushion all day, and then you don't know how to even bring it into your life. So clearly there's no relationship. Well, then what's your problem then?
I can feel stuck in this practice.
Well, then you stop doing it and do something else. That's my answer. When you do Zen or Zazen, what you call, what are you doing actually? What is the practice? What's the technique you're doing?
Just sitting, facing the wall.
And doing what in your mind?
Just following the breath.
And what is the point of that? What is the purpose? What's the reason you're watching your breath? Now, it's a very practical question. Why do you do it? What is the result you want?
Have you heard about Dogen?
Just don't give me lectures. Just answer my question. In your own simple words.
I'm sitting facing the wall.
I know, darling. What is the reason? What for?
myself.
Why? Why? What for? What consequence do you want?
To be with myself.
What for? Then what happens when you're with yourself? What's the benefit of that?
I'm not looking for a benefit.
Okay, then I think you really got some. Okay, I can only give you. Asked me the question. I have to give you my opinion.
Yeah.
The bottom line of what Dharma means is if whatever you do helps you become less attached, less angry, less neurotic, less fearful, more kind, more wise, more generous. If what you do, working or going to the toilet or sitting on your cushion, brings that, then it's valid. If it doesn't, you're wasting your life. So please stop and listen. That's the answer. And it's a profound answer. So you have to find out and ask yourself that question. If what you're doing makes you less neurotic, less angry, less jealous, less depressed, more kind, more wise, more intelligent, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
If it does that,
Yeah.
then you are practicing perfectly.
Yes.
If it does not, then you're doing something wrong and you should reassess your practice. That's my clear answer.
Thank you. And
That's a pleasure. Think about it. Seriously think about it,
I'm
darling.
taking this seriously.
Good, good. No, I'm serious. Okay. Because that's the bottom line.
Moi aussi, complètement.
Okay. Thank you. We are communicating. No, are we communicating?
Okay. I feel inside me just now little bit moved.
Good, good, good. Less choking.
Of course.
Good, good.
And also,
Yeah. Okay, leave it, darling. Just sit on it a little bit. Sit on it. You should email me, we can talk. Get my email, we can talk.
Also very alone
Okay, darling.
at the same time.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I think we best you get my email and we can talk.
Thank you.
Okay? We can discuss. All right, thank you very much. I understand. But we should talk. It's important. Who else? Yes. Yes, darling. Yes. Yes, at the back there. Yes, hang on. Then you're next. Yes, sweetheart.
You mentioned that you have a volatile mind, or at least you had it as a child.
Well, you can see now still I'm a volatile person.
But it seems like you're talking quickly and like, how did you tame your mind? Like, what
Trying to do the job I'm describing here. Literally, every word I'm telling you here is what I'm trying to do. If I'm telling you something else that I did, that's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, what was your motivation? You're not born in like Tibet, so you didn't come to it like nature.
Well, I began being a Catholic and was in love with God, and then I decided I prefer boys, so I gave up God. And then I was a hippie, and then I decided, I got to London in the 60s, 68, and kind of ripe and ready for revolution. So then I kind of got involved in being a kind of communist and demonstrating and everything, and all the rich people became the problem. First it was the non-Catholics who were the problem, then it was all the straight people. And I'm serious, it was my philosophy. Then it was all the rich people. Then I got involved in all black politics, it was all the white people who were the problem. Then I became a feminist, and all the male people were the problem. So now I'm not joking, but this was the process I went through in my kind of trying to work out the meaning of life, trying to work out what life's all about, trying to work out why the suffering, blah, blah, blah. And by that point, and I'm not joking, I'd really literally exhausted all options for who to blame for the problems in the universe, So I wanted something spiritual again. I didn't quite know what I wanted. And then I eventually bumped into these Tibetan Buddhists, and they said I should look at my mind. Well, it was a brand new idea to me. I'd never heard of that before. And I've been doing it 41 years, still trying, doing my best. Finding Buddha's approach the most useful to starting here. Fine to be political, fine to be social, that's out there. But he says, you know, Dalai Lama says, compassion's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. This bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. Compassion wing is the point, to help others. But you've got to put yourself together first. So that's the wisdom wing, you know. So I'm finding the Buddhist approach, it's an evolution, you know, finding the Buddhist approach most useful for me. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yes. Good, darling, thank you. Who? Yes, you there. Yes.
Yes, earlier you said something about arguing with your mind.
Arguing with the stories inside, yes, of course.
Can you say more about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, but yes. I'm sitting there waiting for David to get home. I've got the habit of thinking jealous thoughts. I'm hearing myself. I've got enough awareness because I'm trying to work on my mind. And I've got to have, that's a good start. You've got to have that. And I'm noticing the wisdom. Think of it this way. I say, I am noticing. But you're full of many thoughts. So you've got jealous thoughts and kind thoughts and loving thoughts and intelligent thoughts. Your mind's made up of lots of thoughts. Would you agree? So some of them are virtuous and reasonable and intelligent thoughts. Would you agree with that? And some are ridiculous. Well, you've got to develop some awareness so you can step out and begin to hear all these crazy thoughts. Well, then you're bringing your virtuous thoughts, your intelligent thoughts, like, in other words, jealousy's going demented. How dare he do this to me? It's not fair, blah, blah, blah. And then wisdom is saying, shut up, just relax a bit. It's all right. You don't know yet if that's the truth. Let's wait till he gets home. Let's just look at it. You know you've got a habit to be jealous. That's called arguing with yourself. We do it every day. But most of the time we just do it to beat ourselves up. We don't use it with wisdom and kindness. It's like being someone else's friend and giving advice, but you're giving yourself advice. It's nothing cosmic, I promise you. But it's controlled and it's disciplined and it's based on some reasonableness, not just someone whatever's going on, you know. Are you hearing me? It's nothing cosmic, but we get better and better and better and better at that because you get ever more deeply aware of all the crazy thoughts at a deeper level. Do you see? You see, the thing is a bit like this one he's saying, that the Zen one. I'm not trying to be rude about Zen or mindfulness, but we can misunderstand, I would suggest. Okay, there are many different methods in Buddhism, and there even is one called Dzogchen, one called Mahamudra, which is literally just to watch your mind. But actually, these are very advanced practices, which imply already a lot of work, you know, already a lot of wisdom. So sometimes they're not the best ones. So what I'm suggesting here is, it's sort of like being mindful, just sitting on the cushion watching the wall, is a bit like being mindful of the garden. So you can be so mindful of that garden. You don't know botany, okay? But you can be so mindful of that garden, you can even replicate it in a drawing. Now that's really fantastic, isn't it? But what good is that if you don't know how to interpret what is in your garden? What is the point of being mindful of the weeds and the herbs, but you don't even know how to... You could say intuition is sort of a bit of a feeling for that. You know what's happening. You look at someone, you know they're unhappy. You know you've got a feeling your friend is unhappy, you know, down the road. It's sort of on the outer edges of the capacity that we've all got to develop really powerful clairvoyance. Do you understand? That's all it is. It's sort of not. It's slightly more subtle mind. Some people have it more vividly, but we can train it using the Buddhist techniques. And of course, the only reason to have it for the Buddha is to help others. You know, the compassion wing. The only reason to have clairvoyance is to help others. Do you understand? That's the Buddhist view. What else, people? Yes.
Is there anything in Buddhism that is an equivalent to 12 steps? What I mean is that I know after 19 years of sobriety,
yes,
I cannot do step 10 if I haven't...
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, Buddhism is in different countries, as you know, has developed over the centuries. But one of the ways the Tibetans present is very structured. But it's far more than just, it's the same principle. You know, there's a whole structure, and all the Buddhist teachings in metaphysics and psychology and philosophy all fit into that structure. So you can extract, so the essence of it, the essence of this structure, which will be familiar to you, given that the Buddha's view is that what goes on in here is the source of all the craziness and all the happiness, and that we can transform it. So then the very first level, given that we're driven by our neediness and our ego and our nonsense, that causes us to kill, lie, steal, get drunk, jump on the wrong people. Do you understand? In other words, we behave badly. So the very first level of Buddhist practice is like do what your grandma says, behave nicely. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't get drunk. So we know at that level it's too much to work on the mind that informs it. So you know yourself, you give up the object. But then the real work starts. Which is now you go to high school, that's junior school level, and then you go to high school, and now you start to work on the source of that, which is your own mind, your attachment and your neediness. That you can't do until you've controlled your body and speech. And your body and speech really are just the servants of what goes on in here, isn't it? So junior school level, first stage, and this is a simplistic way of putting it, is you live in morality, you live in vows, you don't harm, you don't kill, and you are the beneficiary of that because it harnesses your crazy energy. Then you get more familiar with yourself, and now you can go to the deeper level and be your own therapist and do the unpacking and unravelling in here, which is how we're talking. And now you can go to the compassion wing, and now you're qualified to help others. So all the teachings fit into that simple structure. It's like the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, they say. Do you understand? So yeah, absolutely. Very much, very much that. What else, people? Yes. Where?
Is there a concept of self-realization in Buddhism? Like Maslow says that there is a pyramid, and on the top we have this self.
You're going to have to start again, sweetheart. Say the whole thing.
Yeah. So is there a concept of self-realization in Buddhism?
So what?
So like devotion, calling.
Huh? The first sentence I hear, but then I want to hear the other words you said. After that, after your question,
Maslow pyramid.
Muscle?
Maslow's hierarchy.
Maslow.
Maslow's hierarchy of human needs.
I don't know what that means. Who's that person?
It was a psychologist.
Yes.
That first we need to satisfy our basic needs.
I see what you're saying.
More and more, but on the top is the self-realization.
I understand.
I mean,
well, one simple way of putting what Buddhism is, if we look at this analogy of the two wings of the bird, the wisdom wing is self-realization. It's becoming who you really are, becoming yourself, which in Buddha's terms, that means getting rid of the neuroses and the fears and the dramas and becoming this blissful, clear, wise, marvelous, content, marvelous human being. So very simply, that is the essence of it. But then you do the compassion wing, that now you're qualified, now you can help others because you're qualified, you understand them as well. So the whole point of it is to become who you really are, which is this marvelous, content, developed, wise, blissful being, but not in the way you're talking. Is that helpful? That answer? No? I'm sorry. Yes. Who's next? Yes.
Our friend mentioned the 12-step program.
Yes.
What's the Buddhist view of addiction? What's the
Well, it's a very interesting point, really, Malcolm. I would say, and I'm meaning this very sincerely, that the word attachment in Buddhism is what we mean by addiction. But our thing in the world is you're only an addict when it's extreme. But all Buddha's saying is we're all addicts. We're all needy for. It's this emotional hunger that I mentioned. So it's really, I think Buddha would have liked that term as an equivalent of the word attachment, which is this bottomless pit of neediness, dissatisfaction, emotional hunger that is always feeling I'm missing something, therefore needs this and puts it onto the objects of the senses, and it's either food or sex or drugs or rock and roll or people. And the deeper level of this attachment is the craving and neediness to be seen and heard by others. So we're all addicts, Buddha says. It's a question of degree. That's really, I would say, that is a very accurate statement. Yeah. So it's just extreme attachment, that's all. In the way we would think of it in the ordinary world.
In the business
One
thing I really see in a lot of business community right now is an addiction to busyness and an addiction to achievement.
Yeah, but that's nothing new though, is it? It's just the world. I mean, attachment. Okay. Yeah. You see, I would suggest what's unique in the Buddhist approach, which takes time to hear. He makes this absolute distinction between the ego-based, neurotic, painful, fractured, broken, deluded states of mind and the positive ones. We don't have that simple distinction in modern psychology. Like I said before, we tend to give these equal status, and as long as the negative ones aren't too berserk, you're an okay, reasonable person. But in a sense, Buddha's way more kind of radical in suggesting that we can become these totally whole beings who are beyond neediness, who are completely blissful, completely clear, completely satisfied, completely wise, completely compassionate. That sounds fantasy, but that's really what he means in the simplest sense of what we can accomplish, every one of us. So, attachment's function, its energy is dissatisfaction. I'm never enough. I don't have enough. So we can see that in all of us, attachment is this infinitely capable part of us that will grab anything to crave. So some of us crave the body to be perfect. Some crave alcohol. Some crave sex. Some crave money. The obvious ones are the objects of the senses. That's the obvious first level. But then the more deep one, the subtler one, is like, it could be power, it could be busyness, it could be cleaning your house all day, it could be, the deepest one of all is what other people think of us, the craving to be seen and need and heard by others, to be verified by others. So it's multifaceted, this attachment, and it will find anything to dump itself on, according to your personality. Do you see what I'm saying? For the Buddha, it's the commonest disease we've all got. And it manifests differently. Now, some people can be attached to, and until we're highly realized, the Buddhist view, we're still going to have attachment. And that's why in the Bodhisattva path and the compassion wing, don't be fundamentalist. Oh, I've got attachment, I'm a naughty person. Use it to do good. It's a marvelous. I mean, eventually you get rid of it, but use it, at least be attached to something reasonable. At least be attached to being kind. At least be attached to helping your children. I mean, it's still polluted, but it's better. It's levels, So at least if you're doing something useful, if you're going to be busy, well, be useful and don't just be busy making guns. Don't just be busy making toilet paper. That's okay. But why not be busy doing something that actually helps people? Then it makes it valuable for you and actually brings some benefit. So it's skillful means, Are you communicating?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you're not attached to holding a good speech?
Me, personally, that's for you to find out. Yeah, someone else. Yeah, go.
I was going to ask about humour.
Humour.
What is humour?
I think if we didn't laugh, we'd cry, wouldn't we? Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me when you go to a person who's very fundamentalist, stuck in their own views, they're very, very serious. They're heavy. So I think the heavier you are, the more, heavy. But it seems to me, I'm not saying I'm so funny or anything, but people tell me I'm funny. They laugh at me. There's this famous English comedian called Ronnie Corbett. Anybody know him? From the 80s and 90s. The number of people when I lived in London, oh my God, I thought you were Ronnie Corbett. I can't tell you. English people will know what I'm talking about. He's this little short little dude with glasses, Then a taxi driver in the night. My God, I thought you were Ronnie Corbett. It's very funny. So I think when your mind is more relaxed, it can be funny. But if you're heavy, so look at those fundamentalist religious people, fundamentalist politicians, the heaviness of them. So there seems to be a relationship, doesn't there? The Dalai Lama's very funny. He's hilarious, actually. Any of these Tibetan Lamas I know, they're hilariously funny. You see them together laughing, they're like these maniacs. They're hilariously funny. So there's something about it, I think. Do you understand? What else, you people? Time to go home already. After a full belly of dinner.
You think that Milarepa was a funny guy?
He was hilarious, yes. Why? You think he wasn't?
I think he was completely determined.
Also that. He was definitely that, yeah.
Yes.
But I bet he was funny too.
I missed that point.
I know. Then I think you've got to have that point. You've got to lighten up.
But I'm in Sweden because they told me in Sweden, don't be too much. So I'm happy to see you here. I'm happy, really.
I know, but it's got to be also, that's right, you're doing a good job. I admire. Keep trucking. You're fine. You live in Switzerland? Where do you live?
I live here in Stockholm, just a few blocks from here.
With the Swedes? Oh.
Excuse me?
You live with the Swedish people?
I live with, and I love the Swedish people.
Oh, good.
I love the way they behave.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Really?
Okay. So who else? Come on, you people. Yes.
The balance between working on changing your mind
yes.
and changing the circumstances.
Yes, exactly. It's up to the, well, it depends. Like if he is cheating, okay, I'm jealous. That's one thing. That's internal. I've got to work on it no matter what. You agree, don't you? For my own sanity, forget everything else. Then let's say I think he's harming me. I think he's cheating. So then that's a real struggle for me, because then I've got to be convinced that he's not cheating on me, so I've got to realise this is my own problem. But now let's say he is cheating on me. That's the next step. So then the question is, what do I do? I've still got to work on my jealousy. Like the woman in prison, she couldn't change the world, so she changed her mind. You've got to do that no matter what. But that doesn't mean I still can't see and work on the relationship and see if there's any reason that we can continue to work together. I've got to have some sense and trust that he will try and change. But if after 16 years he's still cheating and I'm still bashing my head against a brick wall, I'm being kind of stupid. Wouldn't you agree? So, so really it gets to the point. I've done everything I can. I've worked with him. I've given them a chance to change because I can't handle it. And you've got to be realistic. Some people don't mind if he cheats. That's cool. But I just say I can't handle it. I've got to accept that I can't handle it. Don't beat myself up, but don't bully him. So at a certain point, if I realise he's not changing, then it comes down to it. I've got two choices. And this is where we get very upset because we keep thinking, nah, you've got to keep trying. I've got two choices. I stay and I work on my mind, or I leave. Now, if we all did that, I always quote this number, and it's really fun job. It's like trying to learn football, but you keep going and hanging out with cricketers. It won't help. You know, it just won't help. You've got to need fellow cricketers. No, it's so true. There's so many things we do need to be able to do this job.
Because in some circumstances you bloom and others...
Absolutely, darling. No, this is true. And so even though the Buddhist point is the mind is the main thing, don't ignore the circumstances. They are massive. I mean, I remember this vividly as a child. Well, there was a family of 7 children, a very volatile family, you know, doesn't matter, whatever the reasons, volatile family. And of course, with children, we tend to think, oh, there's the kids, you know, put them all together. Well, we had 7, and they're all like bossy like me, you know, 6 girls and a boy. Anyway, I was a bully, whatever. But the point is this. I was always angry, always volatile, always freaking out because I literally felt suffocated most of the time. I'm not blaming. But the point is this. By the time I was about 13, it was a time of, it was in the 1950s, and it was a time of Elvis. And in England, I know they call them teddy boys. But what was that? What did you do in Sweden? Did you have an equivalent of teddy boys in the 50s? And no? The boys were like in Greece and they slicked their hair back, and the girl... Well, in Australia we call the girls were widgies and the boys were bodgies. It was uniquely Australian, you know. So I was yearning to be a widgie, of course. I was 13 and I stole my mother's lipstick and high heels and I was 13, very naughty. At the same time I was in love with God, so I don't know how these two parts of me fit together, but they did. And I was walking up and down our main road trying to seduce the greengrocer's son, you know. So my mother freaked out completely. And I remember she was telling me off, you know, and then she said, I used to like reading books, and she said the word, "You have the audacity." And I never heard that word before. I kept saying, oh, how do you spell that, you know? Trying to think of this word audacity. So then she sent me to boarding school. Now my point is this. Overnight I became a saint because the conditions changed. It was too much to expect a little girl with a volatile mind to behave nicely with 7 other little children and in a chaotic family. That's why we've got to realise you can't keep telling your kid to stop being angry. You just put them in a quiet room. So my mother sent me to boarding school. So I was in heaven overnight. I went to mass every day. I became a saint. I studied for the first time. I discovered this other part of me that I didn't even know when I was in the family because the conditions changed. So even though the mind is the main point, conditions, circumstances are absolutely major. We need to find the right ones until we're more strong. Like in other words, to think of giving up attachment to alcohol while continuing to drink alcohol is like hilarious, you know. So to expect me to give up anger and being volatile, it's not blaming, in a chaotic environment is too much to expect of a little girl. And that's why we shouldn't worry too much about our children, you know. They can be crazy, but put them in a different circumstance and you'll see other parts of them. We need the right part to feed ourselves, you know. It's really important. It makes sense, doesn't it? Anyway, what else, people? Questions? Huh? Yeah, Malcolm.
In the first part of the talk, you said basically that suffering is optional. That's what the Buddha...
Well, I mean, yeah. It's an interesting way to put it, yeah. It's the hardest job we'll ever do, but he is saying it's not set in stone, and by changing our mind we can change it, yes. Enormously difficult. And some situations, unbelievably difficult. But nevertheless, yes, go. And in the long term, of course, his methods are about ridding suffering completely. Yeah. Long term, yeah.
So if we say that suffering is optional,
yeah,
then why do we spend so much time suffering
habit.
until we wake up?
It's really a disappointing answer, but it's habit. That's the only way to answer it. It's habit.
So
That's all.
So my parents had a habit, they gave me their habit.
No, they didn't give you the habit. This is the thing that Buddha's saying. They didn't.
Okay, so tell me where it came from.
So Buddha's view is your consciousness came from before. This is a fundamental point in Buddhism. You can take this or leave it, but it's part of the bigger picture. Your consciousness, which is not physical, is the beginningless and endless continuity of mental moments. So you, in a simplest sense, you came into your mummy's egg and sperm in her fallopian tube due to all sorts of reasons. They go into this in, again, great depth in the literature. You came into that egg and sperm fully programmed with a bunch of habits. Now, the West says the same, but they're mummies and daddies and grandma's habits. But the Buddha says, no, honey, they're your habits. That's all. That's all. They're your habits. Hitler came with his habits. Mother Teresa came with her habits. Each of us comes with our habits. I mean, that's where the whole view of karma is, and this whole other discussion of Buddha's bigger picture, but that's the essence of it. And for me, even as a hypothesis, without going into detail, it's kind of profound because it demands, it makes me own the anger and the jealousy and the fears and the love and the compassion as mine, rather than they came from mummy, which means I'm a bit of a victim of someone else's plan. And that's the key thing that I would say is very fundamentally different with the Buddhist view from the bigger picture point of view. When I was a Christian, I came from God. If I'm a materialist, I come from mummy and daddy. It's the same philosophy. The Buddhist is, no, baby, you come from yourself. We don't need creating. So just experientially, it's quite a profound point because it implies then it's my anger and my love and my being good at music, so I can do something with it. But in a sense, if it comes from mummy and daddy, I'm a bit of a victim already. It's their plan, and they kind of gave it to me. So I think psychologically, it's quite an interesting point. Yeah. Do you understand? What else?
Shall we have a break, Venerable?
What, darling?
Shall we have a tea break?
No, we've got no time for break. We've got to go home. It's 9 o'clock. Isn't it time to go to 9 o'clock? Didn't we say 9 o'clock? 10?
We can go till 10. We can have a break and go till 10.
You can go. I mean, if I was Lama Zopa, I'd keep you here till 3 in the morning, but I wouldn't do that because you'd get mad at me. So, what do you people want? What do you want to do?
Meditation.
Have a cup of... Oh, shush, this is the whole thing's meditation. You just didn't notice.
Formal meditation.
So, what do you want to do? Have a cup of tea, another break? Or you want to keep going and then go? And then just finish it. We've got enough. I talk so fast anyway. You understand there's more than enough food for thought. Just we'll go a little bit longer, I think. There's no reason to go till 10 o'clock. No. You've got more than enough food for thought. So, what are the questions? I think questions, I like questions. People. Yes, darling. Lisa.
Why don't you remember your previous lives?
That's easy. Why don't you? I mean, you don't remember. You get up at 7 this morning, and then 8 o'clock you don't remember 99% of that 1 hour. That'd be ridiculous. It's just it's the conceptual mind. You see, this is the Buddha's view of the mind. Even if when you get single point of concentration, and you haven't finished the job yet, you can't believe the power of your mind. You're able to go to a more subtle level. You have the capability, and don't think of this as just religion. This is practical. The techniques are there for anyone who wants to do them. You can access this subtle level, which can remember perfectly. Eventually, the Buddha would say, everything we ever think and do and say, literally is stored in our consciousness. Stored there. So one Lama said it's like we're shooting a movie all day, and then life after life we're playing out those movies. But everything we've ever seen or heard goes in there, but conceptually and sensory, it's too gross. So, you hear stories about this one woman who tried to kill herself, a young woman, American, but always very depressed, and she tried to kill herself. She said her mother gave away when she was a little girl, and she's always feeling sorry for herself, then got married, had children, always depressed, always sorry for herself. Lovely girl. So she tried to kill herself, but she didn't die, obviously. She came back to tell the story. But the point is this. She said one of the clearest things for her was this crystal clear, as she called it, vision, but memory, basically. Because when you become unconscious, when she tried to kill herself, she went to a subtle level, to her subtle mind, right? She said she had this crystal clear memory of every major event in her life, starting from the point of her birth. So all those memories, if they happen to you, they're stored there. But our gross level is not capable. But we are capable. Clairvoyance for the Buddha is no big deal. No big deal. This is natural, the capability of everybody when you get single point of concentration. Because your subtle mind has that capacity. The gross level that depends upon the brain and the conceptuality and the sensory doesn't have that capability. That's all. That's the answer. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, darling.
To me?
Yes.
Oh. What is single point concentration?
Single point of concentration is the name given to this technique that these Indians thousands of years ago, these amazing thinkers and marvelous beings before the Buddha, created, invented, came up with. And it's known as shamatha in Sanskrit. If you've read any of the Buddhist literature, it's called shamatha in Sanskrit. It's also known in English as calm abiding. And it's this very skillful psychological technique that enables you to go beyond the growth with enormous discipline, lots and lots of practice and discipline. It enables your mind to go beyond the grosser level of conceptuality and sensory to access these more subtle levels of cognition. And when you've got it, your mind is super subtle, effortlessly concentrated. There's no berserk mind whatsoever. It can be effortlessly concentrated, and all these different results you can have clairvoyance, blissful, complete control over your mind, and it's the fundamental technique that is necessary in order to do the job at a deeper level, which is known as vipassana, insight meditation. There's two main modes of meditation in Buddhism, thousands of techniques, that is necessary then to do the job of unpacking and unravelling and sorting out the mind. It's the only way to say it. Does that make sense? And what's known as mindfulness meditation is a variation coming from this technique that's popular in the world these days.
Can you say a few words, like practically, what does it look like, this single point?
You mean, okay, how you do, the technique itself, yes. How you practice it, you would, okay, close your eyes, relax, I'll do it now. Just be comfortable, be natural, okay? Don't think it's going to be special, just because it's called meditating. It's just your mind. So there's many kinds of meditation, you know, but this particular one, it's this practicing of this one known as shamatha or concentration meditation. So the result of it is pretty amazing, but we're talking about the training in it. So what you're going to do, what we're attempting to do for 3 minutes, let's say, is simply attempting to focus on one thing, to pay attention to one thing. So I just want to use an analogy first. It's very simple. You're in a room of 100 people and they're all chatting away and you're dying to know what they're all saying. Well, that's like our head every second. Endless thoughts raving on, and there's no control. We think this and we think that, and we remember this and we think that, and before you know you want to kill yourself. 5 minutes later you want to kill your husband. Next minute you're happy. It's just like insane, you know, berserk, because we just follow, we're like just dragged from pillar to post by all our crazy thoughts because we have no control over them. So, okay, what we're trying to do then is using this analogy of being in a room of 100 people all chatting away. You don't ask them to leave the room. You've decided you're going to learn to concentrate. So you're going to look at that spot on the wall. This is the analogy, okay? You've got to decide, I'm going to pay attention to that spot on the wall and not get distracted. So that means you're not going to ask the people to go away. You're not going to tell them to shut up. But you've got to train your mind to concentrate. That's all we're trying to do here. So, you know, the 100 people are our crazy thoughts. So what we're going to do, we're going to take one, as I keep saying, there are many techniques. The one we're discussing here, the Zen one, that's a different technique. This is a simple application of a simple technique of how to practice concentrating. So we're going to take an object to focus on. So we're going to use the sensation at the tip of our nose. So first of all, just do some breathing, a couple of breaths, and you've got to note, you've got to locate that sensation. So when you breathe out and you breathe in, it's slightly different. So just get the general location of that sensation at your nose when you breathe. So locate the sensation. Take a couple of breaths and you'll see it. Just that sensation at the tip of your nose as the breath goes in and out. That's the spot on the wall, if you like. Okay, so we've located it. So what we're going to do for 3 minutes, what we're going to practice doing, because you obviously won't succeed at it, we're only just beginning, what we're going to practice doing is paying attention to it. So that needs determination, because we're so addicted to all the crazy voices in our head, we just wander off and listen to everything. There's no awareness, you know. So we're trying to step out of it, and we're going to just not get all the thoughts to go away. Don't ask them to go away. Don't care if they don't go away. But when the key is, we're going to pay attention to that sensation, which means we're not going to rush off following the thoughts. So the next thing is, of course, the mind will wander off. It's its habit. So you're going to have another part of your mind watching like a hawk. Every time your attention wanders off, you bring it back to the breath. You see it wandering off again, you bring it back to the breath. It's sort of like you're learning to ride a bike as a little girl. You get on the bike and you fall off the other side. What do? You pick yourself up, you get back on the bike, and then you fall off. You pick yourself up, you get back on the bike, and you fall off. And one day you won't fall off. So that's the practice here. It's the same. So the job we're doing here is not trying to feel good. It is not trying to make the thoughts go away. It is not to have some vision or good feeling. It's a really practical thing. We're practicing concentrating. Practicing. So you pay attention to the breath. That's the job, okay, for 3 minutes with strong determination. Every time you wander off, you simply bring yourself back to the breath. That's it. 3 quality minutes, okay? Just the breath. Keep your mind sharp, just the breath. Okay, relax now. Just 3 minutes. Good. It's good. Better to have 3 quality minutes than 20 minutes spacing out. So does that answer your question? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I think, forget most of us won't get single point of concentration in this life. You need to go off to the mountains in certain conditions and so many qualifications just to get there, and several years it'll take. But we can do it if you've got that level of discipline and practice and renunciation. But the practical application of this in day to day, I'd say one of the immediate benefits is because you're practicing not following every thought. That's really what you're doing. You're practicing watching one thing. You understand? So the aim is not, therefore you're practicing, you're strengthening this part of your mind to not just follow weakly every thought that arises, which is how we do most of our life. And then because we're not paying attention, we don't realize all the trouble's coming. We don't realize the wheels are falling off. So one of the immediate benefits of this, in a practical, really practical day-to-day sense, you're stepping for 3 minutes, 5 minutes in the morning, and really 3 or 5 minutes quality is really excellent. Do you understand? You're stepping out of your head. So one of the first things is naturally you'll become more conscious of all the crazy thoughts. Do you understand? But that's good. Don't think it's bad. Because my analogy is like the garden again. You've never heard of botany. You've never heard of weeds and flowers and herbs and veggies. You don't know anything. You just know there's a mass of stuff out there growing and you can't identify any of it. But you know it's out of control. So someone gives you a method of how to identify. So you learn botany, right? But you've got to learn to concentrate. When you start looking at that garden, you now have to get some focus. So you can look carefully and then you can, oh, look, there's a weed and there's a herb. I couldn't tell the difference before. So you've got to learn to focus, to do anything, to make a cake, to walk. You've got to focus, otherwise you go crazy. So focus is a reasonable thing you need. So then having that, but not just focusing on the garden. If you don't know how to call a weed or a herb or a flower, what's the point? Are you hearing my point? And that's often, are you hearing that point or not? You've got to imbue that focus with intelligence and know that, wow, now you'll go, well, that's a weed and that's a herb. I couldn't tell the difference before. You're stepping out of it and you're observing it carefully. But the next step is, what'll I do with it? Well, you pull out the flower, you pull out the weeds and grow the herbs. The mind the same. It's a simple analogy. Now, this is not the Zen approach. This is not the Mahamudra approach. There are different approaches, but this is a practical beginning approach. So you're starting to be practical, stepping out, and then becoming more conscious. You bring this little technique to bear in your daily life. So normally when you're driving the car, you know you wake up in the morning, you feel a bit anxious, you're not paying attention, you don't know why, because we never pay attention to what's going on. We don't try to sort out what we're thinking. We just feel the tension and it builds up. And then suddenly a car jumps in front of you and you lose the plot. But here, starting the day with this, because you're training yourself to focus, you're stepping out of your head for 3 minutes. You learn to become more aware of not only the traffic, but also what's happening here. And then you start to be able to be more conscious and having intelligent conversations with yourself before you lose the plot when the car jumps in front of you. You become more aware of what's going on in your mind. That's what I'm trying to... It's as simple as that. And you become more intelligent with knowing what to do with it. Are we communicating? As Lama Yeshe puts it, learning to be your own therapist. You know, that's day-to-day work.
How can you explain that in Tibetan tradition, Mahamudra and Dzogchen are very, very advanced at 10 years?
That's right.
But in the tradition I follow in Shikantaza, that it doesn't matter. Because you just sit until you surrender.
I understand. I understand. There are different methods and different techniques. There's no contradiction between any of them.
No contradiction.
No. We have to find the one that works for us.
Because I started with the Tibetan when
I
was 17.
I understand.
And it was too much because everything was chaos.
I understand.
And when I come in Zen, in the practice of shunyata, that was completely...
I understand.
I felt relieved.
I understand.
So...
we have to find the techniques that work for us.
Yeah.
That's the one we have to do. Yeah. And be brave sometimes and chuck something out and try something else. See it from another perspective sometimes can be very helpful.
I feel my heart in this practice.
Really?
So the Tibetan, I don't know why, but really, I completely...
Okay. Yeah. Well then, Mahamudra's coming out next year, so you read it. It's very beautiful. You'll like it a lot. Lama Yeshe's teachings. Beautiful. It's beautiful. You read it. You'll like it.
I studied some books, but the practice will be wonderful.
Yeah.
If it's with you...
It's edited by me.
It will be a big and wonderful challenge for me to maybe grow a little bit.
Good, darling.
So many years of Zen, I'm still stupid.
No, you're all right. You're doing great. You're doing better than you think. Come on. What else, you people? I think it's time to go home. Come on. Don't you think? Don't you think? It's enough. Come on. Yes, that's exactly right. Food for thought. So then never give up, people. I don't care if you become a communist. I don't care if you become a Buddhist. I don't care if you sit on your head. Just look at your mind and know it's flexible, know it's yours, and know you can do so much with it, and you can, pave your way to your own self, whatever words you like, okay? And never give up. That's the key. Never give up. Never give up. Never give up. Just keep moving. Okay, people? Thank you very much. I'll sing another little prayer to finish, like bookends, We did a little motivation, and now we'll do a little dedication. So here we've been, for 3 hours, whatever it is. And really the Buddhist view is as many thoughts we've had. We don't remember 99% of them, but they've all gone in, okay? And we've sown seeds, we've nourished, we've done all this inner work, this inner gardening, okay? How marvellous. And we think, may we continue to nourish these seeds every day with whatever rises in front of us in our life, never giving up on our amazing potential. And I really mean this so sincerely. So we, for our sake, and then we can be of use to the world, you know. That's it, really. Jamchob semcho grinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchig ke panyampa me payang gong ne gong du pelba sho. Okay.
Would you like to mention your CD?
Oh yeah, I did my advertisements. Yeah, I mean that CD there. What happened to the CD? I'll just give you a quick history. A couple of years ago in Sydney, this woman, yeah, here it is, Devotion, this naked, gorgeous girl on it. This woman came to my teachings and she said she recognised a trained voice. And my mummy taught me singing when I was a kid. My sisters would go to the football and I'd do singing with my mother. So she had all these hopes for me, but then I went to London and became a revolutionary. She was so sad. So anyway, we decided to do this CD. Well, we started doing instruments, and I can't stand the way they do all the flutes and the la-di-da with Tibetan music. I hate it, you know. And it's all very 10th century. So we ended up doing a cappella, my voice, and it was basically a choir. We did parts, then she multiplied my voices, so it's a choir of Rabinas. Then I couldn't do the high bits, I'm like a bass baritone now, you know, but I used to be a soprano. So then she did a few of the high voices. So it's a choir of Rabinas, basically. Taken a few prayers from different practices, and it's to raise money by Bodhicitta Trust, that's all. And then the pilgrimage, the postcards. That's my commercials, okay? Thank you, everybody. And you can download digitally. It's cheaper, $8. This is 12 euros or whatever it's called, 120 things, crowns. But you can do $8 down digital. Devotioncd.com, and you can listen free for 3 times. And apparently you can listen free, and then you can buy the CD on digital if you like. Okay? Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much,
Robina. Okay.
I hope we have booked you already next year.
Oh, we'll come next year, definitely. And for a longer time.
For the whole weekend.
Okay, we can do.
Thank you also.
Thank you, darlings. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you. Okay.